I know most of you come here for stories that feel impossible, tales that sound like they belong in late-night radio shows or dusty conspiracy forums, but I'm asking you to listen, really listen, because what I'm about to share is not a story I made up. My name is Michael Reed. I'm 35 years old, and until last year I was nothing more than an ordinary guy. I worked at an automotive plant outside of Detroit, spent most of my evenings watching old movies or fixing up my secondhand truck, and I never thought much about the universe beyond what I could see. Aliens, UFOs, abductions, those were things people laughed about in the break room or stories my uncle used to tell after a few beers. I never believed in any of it, at least not until the night everything changed. It was late October, one of those nights where the air feels too still, like even the wind is holding its breath. I had stayed late at work because one of the presses broke down, and I didn't leave the factory until well past midnight. My drive home took me along a stretch of rural highway, 20 miles of cornfields and forest with only the occasional gas station or diner. That night, though, it felt different. Empty. Too empty. I remember glancing up through the windshield and noticing that the stars seemed sharper, brighter than usual, as if the sky had been scrubbed clean. I even pulled over for a second, killed my headlights, and just stared. That's when I saw it. At first it looked like a plane, 3 bright lights in a triangular formation, gliding too slowly across the horizon. But the longer I watched, the less sense it made. The lights weren't blinking, and the object wasn't moving like any aircraft I'd ever seen. It hovered for a moment, then shot forward in a straight line so fast I lost track of it. My heart started pounding, but I forced myself to laugh. Probably a drone, I thought. Some rich kid playing with military-grade toys. I shook it off, got back in the truck, and kept driving. But then the lights appeared again, this time directly above me. They were closer now, and I swear I could feel something, a vibration in the air, like the low hum of a massive generator. I pulled over once more, and as soon as I stepped out, the hair on my arms stood straight up. The object was enormous, far larger than any plane, its surface smooth and black, reflecting almost nothing. The lights glowed faintly against the edges, and I couldn't see wings or engines, just a silent, hovering mass. For a few seconds I stood there, frozen, telling myself it had to be some kind of experimental craft from the Air Force Base 100 miles south. But then, as if it knew I was watching, the lights rotated and aimed straight at me. That was when the panic really set in. I scrambled back into my truck, slammed the door, and floored the accelerator. Gravel sprayed behind me as I tore down the highway, my eyes flicking between the road and the rearview mirror. The object followed. No sound, no visible propulsion, just gliding effortlessly above the tree line, matching my speed. I pushed the truck as hard as it would go, 80, 90, the engine screaming, but the craft stayed right with me. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but I had no signal out there. Just endless miles of darkness and the steady pursuit of something I couldn't explain. At some point I remember yelling at myself, "You're tired, Mike. You've been working 16 hours. You're hallucinating." But no matter how many times I tried to rationalize, the thing didn't disappear. It kept following, closer and closer, until the lights filled my mirrors and the cab of the truck glowed in their reflection. And then, this part I'll never forget, the radio turned on by itself. Static first, then a low, garbled voice, not English, not any language I recognized, vibrating through the speakers as if the truck itself was speaking. I panicked and hit the power button, but the static stayed. Louder, sharper. I could feel it in my teeth. The last thing I remember clearly was slamming on the brakes and stumbling out onto the road, my head spinning from the noise, and looking up as a beam of pale blue light poured down on me. After that, everything is fragmented. Flashes of sterile white rooms, figures moving just outside the edge of vision, a cold pressure in my skull. And then I woke up in my own bed 12 hours later, with mud on my boots, my truck parked neatly in the driveway, and a ringing in my ears that wouldn't go away. I tried to tell myself it was a dream, but when I checked my phone, I saw the call log, 6 missed calls from a blocked number at exactly 3:15 a.m., the same time the light swallowed me whole. That was the night I stopped sleeping normally. That was the night I knew something or someone was hunting me. I woke up the morning after with a bruise blooming on the inside of my forearm and a thin, crescent-shaped burn on the back of my neck that felt numb to the touch. My phone still kept buzzing with missed calls I couldn't return. Family, a supervisor asking where I was, and one text from my sister that simply said, "Are you okay? Mom's worried." I lied. I told everyone a maintenance crew had held me up and that I must have dozed off in the truck. The truth sat in my chest like a stone. For the first week, I tried to behave like nothing had changed. I went back to work. I fixed a broken conveyor belt. I ate greasy diner food at noon and complained about the cold. But there were little things I couldn't explain. My watch had stopped exactly at 3:15 and would not start again until I manually wound it. My truck's dash camera, one I'd installed for a laugh a few months earlier, had files corrupted from that night, hours of footage reduced to static, and a single 30-second clip that showed a bright blur and then nothing. The clip showed my truck pulled over on the shoulder, lights flickering, and then a wash of white that obscured the frame. When I replayed it 100 times, I felt sick. I started noticing cars I couldn't identify parked down side streets. Vans with tinted windows that would vanish when I blinked. Once, on my way home, a blue SUV pulled up parallel to me at a light, the driver staring intently at me with a weird, polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. When the light changed, he sped off and the billboard over the highway flickered, the advertisement warping like a poorly rendered video game. I told myself I was being paranoid until my neighbor, an old man named Frank who fed feral cats and drank black coffee on his porch at dawn, knocked on my door and said, "Mike, you been up all night? I saw a light over your place. Looked like the moon fell down and wanted to eat your house." He laughed like it was a joke, but his hands trembled when he handed me a folded newspaper. Inside was a small article about a woman 3 counties over who'd reported strange lights and missing time. Local police had written it off as prank calls, but the photo showed the exact same triangular light pattern I'd seen the night I was taken. After that, I couldn't sleep at all. The dreams started, if you could call them dreams. They were precise, clinical sequences of images. Corridors of frosted glass, a clasp of cold metal around my wrist, a voice that pressed like a thumb against the inside of my skull and spoke in syllables that felt like math. Waking up from these sequences felt like being pulled back through water. I'd surface gasping with a taste of iron on my tongue. I tried to talk about it with friends, but the conversation ended awkwardly. One of my coworkers, Derek, asked if I'd been on meds. Another joked about being famous on some alien subreddit. No one said what we were all thinking. If I was telling the truth, who would believe me? I started keeping a log. Every time I saw something odd, lights, a van, a buzzing in my teeth, I wrote down the date, time, weather, and what I thought I felt. I taped the page to my wall and watched the list grow into a map. Patterns emerged. The sightings were always near water or below power lines. The buzzing in my teeth came 10 to 15 minutes before the craft appeared. The missing minutes always happened at night. On the 20th day, a man in a gray suit appeared at my workplace. He introduced himself as Agent Keller with a federal investigative agency and asked questions I didn't want to answer. He wanted to know where I had been on the night I claimed I'd been taken, the make and model of my truck, whether I'd ever had any psychological treatment. He was polite but distant, like a surgeon asking about a patient's habits. He didn't push when I refused to elaborate beyond the basics, but he left a card with a phone number and told me if anything else happened to call. That evening, my apartment door was ajar when I came home. My heart tried to climb out of my chest. I found the place ransacked, drawers pulled, photographs shuffled. Nothing taken except for a small metal box under my bed where I kept my tools. Inside the box, there was a single object I did not recognize. A smooth, pebble-sized piece of metal that was warm, like it had been under skin. It had no seams, no markings, and when I held it, my phone screen flickered and the room hummed. I called Keller and he answered within minutes. voice flat and boringly reassuring. He told me to bring the object in. "Don't touch it with your bare hands again," he said. "Wrap it in cloth. Bring it to me at the office. We'll see what it is." I wanted to throw the pebble in the river, to find some way to rid myself of the thing and the attention it attracted, but the pebble felt like a promise. It pulsed faintly against my palm like a heartbeat. When I arrived at the federal office, the polite sterile smell hit me and my chest tightened. Keller met me in a hallway that smelled of lemon disinfectant and recycled air. He took the pebble without blinking and moved it into a lead-lined box that made my skin prickle when he closed it. They ran scans I couldn't understand, graphs with jagged lines and numbers, and a woman in a lab coat told me, in a voice that was kind but practiced, that there was anomalous electromagnetic activity and isotopic signatures that didn't match anything on file. Her words were careful, like someone tiptoeing around a sleeping animal. "We can't make definitive claims," she said. "But we—" and she left the sentence dangling as if the rest of it would be dangerous to say aloud. Keller offered to put me up in a hotel under witness protection for a few nights, for my safety, and told me not to speak to anyone about what had happened. I refused both offers. I didn't want strangers telling me how to live in my own life. I wanted my truck back, my routine, the small predictable inconveniences of a life that still made sense. I thought maybe if I acted normal, the thing hunting me would get bored. I was wrong. That night, as I lay awake with the logbook spread open on my chest, the buzzing returned, soft at first, like a distant generator, then louder until my teeth felt like they were shaking. The light filled my room, and for a heartbeat I thought about the safety of the dark. Then the beam struck the window and the glass sang like a struck tuning fork. A shape blocked the light outside, too smooth, too black. And in the reflection on the window, I saw something that wasn't my own face looking back. The reflection in the window wasn't mine. For a blink I thought it was some trick of the light. My own face stretched and smeared, but the eyes were wrong. Too large, the irises an impossible black, and they held a patience that felt older than the earth. I pulled the blanket up as if it would shield me and the thing outside, if it was a thing, tilted its head, as if studying me like an insect pinned under a glass. I remember the sound of my own breathing, shallow and fast, and then the door across the hall opened without a foot touching it, and a cold wind moved through the apartment that smelled faintly of copper and ozone. I should have run. Instead I walked, slow and stupid with fear, toward the door. The hallway outside was empty, the streetlights throwing long bars across the linoleum. The air hummed with that same low pitch that had been in my teeth, and then the light hit me through the open doorway again. Soft now, diffused, and everything felt like a memory folding in on itself. I didn't feel lifted this time so much as dissolved. The floor dropped away and the hallway elongated into a tunnel of light. My vision tunneled, like looking through a narrow lens, and I was aware of two sensations at once. A pressure at the base of my skull and a terrible, childish vertigo. Then the world snapped back and I was lying on a surface that was colder than concrete and smoother than any tile I'd ever seen. I tried to sit up and realized my wrists were restrained by bands that looked like braided metal but were warm against my skin, as if they were alive. Above me, the ceiling was not a ceiling but a curve of dark metal, punctuated by rows of lights that dimmed and brightened in patterns that made my eyes water. Figures moved at the edge of my vision, tall, willowy shapes, not quite human. Their limbs seemed to bend in ways that made my joints ache just watching them. But what struck me most was how rarely they moved their mouths. Communication came as a pressure in my head, like someone pressing a thumb into my temple and then smiling. The first thought that landed in my skull was simple: we are curious. Curiosity, in my mouth, sounded like an accusation and an apology at the same time. Panic made my voice ragged when I tried to speak, but the words came out as a broken whisper. Why me? The answer unfurled in images more than words. Fields, the hum of power lines, the pebble I'd given Keller, my truck idling on a shoulder, and then a sensation like cool light passing over a wound. They showed me things without asking. Calculus of orbitals, maps of electromagnetic flux over decades, images of other vessels like the one that had taken me, hovering over lakes and towers, always near human infrastructure. The pressure in my head pushed images so fast I could hardly keep up. Men and women asleep in their beds, fishermen at dawn, a child on a swing. Nothing seemed random. The figures, if I could call them that, were not monsters in the way movies had promised. Their movements were efficient, precise. One of them, closer than the others, with a shimmer in the curve of its shoulders, held something like a glass rod and pressed it briefly to my temple. Pain lanced across my vision, like someone scratching at the inside of my skull. Then I saw my own life replaying in quick frames. My mother's call 2 years ago, the first time I fixed my truck's engine. The exact smell of coffee in the diner down the road. They paused on a picture I'd never shown anyone. My daughter's drawing from when she was 5, folded into a lunchbox. For a second, so vivid it made my breath hitch, I felt something like tenderness directed at it. From them. Not harm, the pressure in my thoughts said. But there was a caveat, a mechanical gentleness that felt clinical. We take, we learn, we return. Returning would not be a guarantee, only a variable. Fear clawed up my throat. If they could reach into my head and show me memories, what else could they do? I thought about Keller, about the way the federal man had touched the pebble as if it were an ordinary rock. Had he known? Were there people who knew and were cooperating? The thought brought a new, colder fear. Perhaps the hunt for me wasn't random at all. I tried to flex my fingers against the restraints. To my surprise, they released like wet vines. I sat up, legs weak, and the corridor I had been in unfolded ahead of me like the inside of a living cathedral. Doors, if they could be called doors, swept open and closed on their own, revealing other rooms where silhouettes lay strapped to tables, where lights ran over skin and recorded. Some of the silhouettes turned their heads toward me. Their faces were pale, human-like, mottled with bruises and strange punctures, but their eyes were closed or filmed over. A woman in a jumpsuit I recognized as a lab coat. They'd adapted our clothing shapes for ease, a small human courtesy. Approached and offered me a cup. The liquid inside was clear and sweating in my hands despite the lack of condensation. I drank and felt my stomach settle. She or it, whatever name language could give, leaned close and the thought came without sound. We did not choose individuals for cruelty. We follow signatures. Yours is rich. We study links. I thought of the pebble again and it pulsed in my pocket like a tiny sun. Why keep people? I managed to croak. The answer was immediate and clinical, rehearsed like a scientist reading results. To understand accumulation, to map adaptation. The world warms, grids fail, frequencies change. We catalog resilience. It sounded like an environmental report and not an excuse. I thought of the missing people in the papers, the weird van with the polite driver, and a slow, dreadful logic aligned itself in my mind. This was not random predator behavior. It was observation on an industrial scale. I needed a plan. Panic wouldn't save me. I listened. The vessel had a rhythm and internal logic. The staff moved between rooms in predictable sweeps, returning to a central hub where instruments translated biological rhythms into graphs. If I could reach a doorway and slip into a maintenance shaft, maybe I could find the way they entered and leave via the same thin seam of sky that had carried them here. I let the woman, lab-coated, patient, see me drinking and smiling like a man who had not yet decided to die. When she turned away to consult a screen, I moved. Corridors smelled faintly of metal and something green and alive, like the inside of a greenhouse. I slipped past a pair of figures and found a maintenance hatch with a panel that looked like it had been pried open recently. It was small but crawlable. As I pulled myself in, the vessel thrummed with a different tone, deeper and more urgent. Voices, real human voices, flickered in my head, half-formed, calling names I did not know and one I did. Keller. The mention of the agent was a knife. Someone somewhere was working with them. My hands cramped as I crawled. I could hear the ship's outer hull whisper against the silence of night. Outside, The world was a thin film of sound and light. I found a vent that led up toward the outline of the sky, and I pushed, the metal scraping my palms, my breath loud in my ears. At the end of the shaft, a grate opened onto a cavern of night where a sliver of moon hovered like a promise. I wriggled through and found myself on a platform just inside a doorway that led to a landing bay. There, machines glided and hummed, and a panel showed coordinates I didn't understand. My fingers closed around the pebble in my pocket and it burned through the fabric. Hot. Alive. I thought of every lie I'd told since the night on the highway and the people who would never know why a man had vanished from his bed. I thought of running, of getting back to a life that might no longer be mine. And then, just as I pushed forward toward the edge of the bay, a light swept across the floor and a voice, human, but flat and controlled, said behind me, "Mr. Reed, you should know the rules before you try to break them." I froze. The floor beneath my boots hummed with the machine's breath. The bay doors were opening. I froze, heart hammering, as the voice echoed across the bay. The light cut a path across the metal floor, sharp and cold, illuminating the figures waiting at the edges, tall, still, and impossibly silent. I felt the pebble in my pocket pulse violently, like it was urging me forward, and for a fraction of a second I realized that it wasn't just a beacon for them, it was a key. I made a decision before I could think. I ran, sprinted toward the edge of the bay, arms pumping, lungs burning. The lights swiveled to follow me, the hum in my teeth escalating to a shriek that made my knees wobble, but I kept going. I reached the ramp that led outside, and for the first time I saw the exterior of the craft. It was massive, impossibly vast, hovering silently above the treetops, the night sky bending slightly around it like the world itself was drawn toward its gravity. I leaped off the ramp, rolling on the frozen ground, and ran through the underbrush, branches whipping against my face, the blue light slicing through the trees behind me. Behind me, I could hear it, the subtle shift of gravity, the movement of air as the ship followed, almost alive in its precision. I stumbled over a root, skinned my knees, but I got up, panting, and kept moving. When I finally broke through the tree-line and onto the highway, my truck was there. Headlights off, engine cold. It was like it had been waiting for me. I didn't question it. I jumped in, started the engine, and tore down the road, the craft hovering high above, distant now but still present, still watching. For hours I drove, not looking back, not daring to stop, until the first hints of dawn touched the horizon. Only then did the lights finally vanish, and the hum faded from my teeth. I pulled over on a side road, hands shaking, and called Keller from a diner payphone. My phone had gone dead earlier, and he answered almost immediately, voice calm, unsurprised. "You made it back," he said, like it was routine. "Not everyone does." I asked what it was, why me, and he said only, "They take notes, catalog resilience, and occasionally release you. That's all you'll get for now." After that, my life returned to a semblance of normality, but nothing felt ordinary. The sky always seemed sharper, more alert, as if it could notice me. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night and the hum returns, faint, like a memory or a warning. I know they are out there, still following, still observing, cataloging the ordinary and the extraordinary alike. I have learned to live with it, to move in patterns, to notice the signals before the lights appear. I keep the pebble in a hidden box under my bed. Sometimes it pulses in the dark, a reminder that the world is not ours alone, that there are eyes in the sky we cannot evade, that curiosity can be as terrifying as it is patient. And every time I see a triangular light in the distance, hovering silently, I remember that night, that moment when the impossible pressed against my chest, and I know that the hunt is never over. You might laugh at my story, call me paranoid or delusional, but I know the truth and I live it every day. They are out there, and they are still watching.